The air in those first quiet hours before dawn carried a weight both soft and steady, as if the world itself was holding its breath. A colonial town lay tucked against the gentle bend of a river, its edges fading into open fields and clusters of dark trees. There were no lamps burning yet, no hurried steps or rattling carts, only the faint rustle of wind slipping through the stalks of corn, still heavy with night's cool touch. The houses, built of timber and brick, sat patiently in rows that curved with the land rather than cutting against it. Wooden shutters rested closed against the lingering chill, and the faintest glow of embers within the hearth hinted at life ready to stir. In one home, a single candle flickered as if testing the darkness, its small flame bending toward the wooden beams above. The smell of beeswax mingled with the soft smoke of last night's fire, a scent that spoke of safety, of warmth, of continuity. As the morning deepened, a faint gray light spread across the rooftops, painting the rough shingles in tones of blue and silver. The first sounds began softly, the slow creak of a barn door opening, the distant whinny of a horse waking in its stall, the soft crunch of a boot against packed earth as someone stepped quietly into the open air. There was no urgency in these movements, no shouts, no clanging bells, only the subtle rhythm of a town remembering that it was alive. A farmer moved through the morning mist, his steps sure but unhurried, his hand carrying a small wooden bucket still cool from the well. He paused for a moment, looking out across the rows of corn, each stalk tall and dark against the pale sky. The fields stretched outward like a sleeping sea, their quiet vastness broken only by the low hum of insects beginning their day. He drew in a breath long, steady, and let it out with the kind of contentment born not from ease, but from familiarity. This was life, predictable, grounded, steady as the rising sun. Closer to the center of town, a cluster of narrow streets met at a small square where a few benches circled a great oak. The tree, older than any building around it, spread its arms wide, casting a canopy of shade that would later welcome quiet conversations, hushed laughter, and the gentle murmur of gossip passed between neighbors who had known each other all their lives. But now it stood alone, its leaves whispering softly against one another, their sound like the faint brushing of silk. By mid-morning, shutters opened with a gentle thud, and the smell of baking bread began to drift lazily through the air. A mother leaned from a window, shaking out a cloth before draping it carefully over the sill to dry. Across the way, a young boy carried a small stack of kindling, pausing briefly to examine a beetle crawling across the wooden step. The small creature as fascinating to him as any grand story might be to others. Life moved slowly here, each action deliberate, almost ceremonial in its simplicity. A blacksmith, broad-shouldered and calm, arrived at his forge not with a burst of energy, but with a steady presence. He placed his tools in quiet order, each clink against the anvil a soft punctuation mark in the town's growing murmur. The first swing of his hammer came not with a harsh ring but with a deep, measured tone, the metal bending beneath his skillful patience. From across the way, a pair of horses shifted in their stalls, their soft snorts releasing tiny clouds of breath that vanished into the warming air. In the small tavern at the corner of the square, a door opened with a creak that blended into the low murmur of greeting. A man in a wide-brimmed hat stepped inside, not to rush, not to drink in haste, but to sit and share a few quiet words with the keeper. They spoke of the weather first, always the weather of rain that might come later, of winds from the east that carried the smell of the river. Their conversation was unhurried, punctuated by the soft scraping of chairs against the wooden floor and the low bubbling of a pot that simmered gently behind the counter. As noon approached, sunlight poured gently into the square, softening the edges of every building and lending a golden warmth to the day. Children played not with shrieks but with quiet giggles, their wooden toys clattering softly against the worn boards of porches and steps. Women gathered in pairs, their voices weaving together like the faint notes of a lullaby, speaking of harvests, of neighbors, of the steady rhythm of life that bound them all. And through it all, there was a sense of stillness, not of inactivity, but of peace. Time in these towns did not run, it strolled, it ambled alongside the people who lived there, content to move with them, never ahead, never behind. The world felt whole in its slowness. The air filled not with the weight of ambition, but with the gentle assurance that today would be much like yesterday, and tomorrow, much like today. Afternoon settled over the town not like a sudden arrival, but as a slow unfurling of warmth and light. The sun arched gently above, its rays filtering through wide branches, dappling the packed earth below in soft mosaics of gold and shadow. The air carried with it the faint perfume of tilled soil, warming under the day's embrace, mingled with the delicate sweetness of blossoms that clung stubbornly to fences and hedgerows. Somewhere, a breeze wandered lazily across the fields, gathering whispers of grass and wheat and scattering them like secrets through the streets. The town's rhythm never quickened. Instead, it deepened each step, each voice, each sound falling into the same unhurried harmony. A cart creaked softly as its wheels rolled over uneven boards on a small bridge leading into the square. A pair of oxen plodded along, their broad heads swaying slightly, their breathing even and calm. The driver, a man with sun-browned skin and a hat pulled low over his brow, hummed a tune with no beginning and no end, the melody as circular and steady as the days themselves. The driver, a man with sun-browned skin and a hat pulled low over his brow, hummed a tune with no beginning and no end, the melody as circular and steady as the days themselves. In the forge, the smith paused between strikes, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, then leaning against the anvil for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from an instinctive respect for pace. He knew the day was long, that there was no gain in haste, that metal bent more kindly when coaxed rather than forced. The steady rhythm of his hammer resumed, each tone rich and mellow, a counterpoint to the distant murmur of voices in the square. The tavern's door opened again, letting out a gentle swell of laughter, not raucous, but subdued, like water rippling quietly against a riverbank. Inside, a few men sat around a table, tankards resting loosely in their hands, conversation turning from the weather to talk of crops, of trade, of the occasional traveler who passed through and carried news from places beyond imagination. Their words held curiosity, but not urgency. In this town, the world beyond the river felt like a painting, interesting to behold, but never necessary to touch. On a shaded porch, an elderly woman rocked slowly in a chair that sighed with each movement. A basket of mending lay beside her, untouched for the moment as she gazed out at the street. Her eyes did not seek excitement but rested in the comfort of familiarity. The same faces, the same gentle gestures, the same quiet assurance that life, here, was steady and kind. Children ran past, their laughter soft and fleeting, respectful of the silence that the town seemed to wear like a beloved shawl. Farther down the lane, a cooper sat outside his workshop, sanding the edge of a newly formed barrel. The rasp of wood against tool filled the air with a soothing, rhythmic whisper, a small song of labor and patience. He paused now and then to lift his head toward the river, watching the sunlight shimmer across its surface like threads of silk laid carefully upon water. The river's murmur, low and constant, added yet another note to the town's quiet orchestra. As shadows lengthened, the smell of supper began to drift from open windows. Roasted vegetables, fresh bread, a hint of herbs carried on the cooling air. Neighbors exchanged a few parting words, stepping slowly back toward their homes, their movements without rush, their conversations unfinished but unneeded to be concluded. Here, no one hurried from one moment to the next. Instead, they let the hours slide gently past, like leaves floating downstream. Church bells rang softly, their tone neither commanding nor sharp, but gentle, inviting, as though even faith itself moved in harmony with the town's unspoken vow to keep everything calm. A few families gathered near the small chapel, greeting one another with warm, quiet nods. A hymn drifted softly into the air, low voices carrying words, not with fervor, but with serenity, as if the act of singing was less about reaching upward and more about grounding together in shared peace. By the time the sun slipped toward the horizon, the sky began to bloom with colors. Soft rose, pale amber, the faintest lavender, bleeding at the edges where night prepared to stretch across the world. The first stars blinked awake, shy and silver, as if to see whether the town still carried the calm it had kept through the day. Lanterns were lit with care, each small flame placed behind glass, each glow spilling golden light that pooled across thresholds and porches, like warm invitations to rest. And in the quiet between day and night, the town breathed deeply. Crickets began their nightly songs, steady and delicate, their rhythm as ancient as the soil beneath the streets. Horses settled into stalls with soft, shifting steps. The faint clink of a chain or the swish of a tail echoed like distant lullabies. Windows closed with gentle thuds, voices lowered to murmurs, the world narrowing to the tender confines of home and hearth. Night did not fall abruptly here. It seeped in like a slow tide, filling every corner with coolness and calm. The streets, narrow and worn, seemed to exhale as if relieved by the softness of the evening air. Candles flickered behind shuttered windows, their little flames steadying themselves against the occasional draft. The whole town seemed to shrink slightly, not in fear or retreat, but in a gentle drawing in, like a family gathering close after a long day's work. Inside, supper lingered on wooden tables, bowls half emptied, spoons resting quietly like tired companions. Families sat together in no hurry to finish their meals, speaking in low tones, laughter appearing not as bursts but as soft ripples. The day's conversations were not about victories or failures, not about grand ideas or distant threats, but about the soil, the weather, the steady rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting. Small stories of neighbors helping neighbors, of a child learning to read by the faint light of a candle, of bread rising just right that morning. These were the threads that wove the fabric of the evening. Beyond the walls, the town itself hummed. Not the sharp hum of industry or the restless buzz of a growing city, but the low, steady murmur of life, at peace with its own slowness. A dog padded softly across the porch, nails clicking gently against the boards. A horse shifted in its stall, blowing a warm breath into the cool air. Somewhere, a door creaked and closed, the latch clicking home with a satisfying final certainty. Above, the stars now scattered wide, no city lights to drown their brilliance. They stretched like an infinite quilt of cold fire across the black, some burning steady, others winking shyly in and out of view. For those awake enough to look, it felt as though the heavens themselves bent low, stooping close to listen to the quiet music of this little town. A young boy, restless from the day's heat, slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The wooden boards were cool beneath him, the air smelling faintly of pine and distant rain. He watched the fireflies emerge, little lanterns carried by invisible hands, blinking softly, without rhythm, yet somehow perfectly in tune with the night's gentle pulse. He cupped one in his hands for a moment, feeling its tiny legs against his palms, before releasing it back into the dark, where it blinked once, twice, then disappeared among 100 others. Farther down the lane, an old man leaned against a fence post, pipe in hand, drawing slow, deliberate breaths of smoke that curled like lazy clouds before vanishing. He listened, not for danger, not for news, but simply for the sound of the world. Crickets sang in layers, some close, some far. The river murmured softly beyond the edge of the fields, its waters slipping past roots and stones with quiet persistence. A single owl called once from the forest's edge, its low voice both solemn and comforting. Time seemed to loosen its grip at night, no longer counting hours but simply holding space. The moon rose steadily, casting silver over rooftops and trees, tracing the shape of chimneys and branches with delicate care. Shadows stretched and curled, but none of them menaced. They only followed, like quiet companions keeping watch. The night did not demand attention. It offered it. For anyone willing to pause, it gave the gift of noticing. The way leaves shifted against one another with a sound like soft cloth. The way the air cooled inch by inch. The way the heartbeat itself seemed to slow, aligning with the town's tranquil rhythm. Inside, the last of the candles were pinched out one by one, little sighs of smoke drifting upward like ghosts too tired to linger. Beds creaked as they received the weight of bodies settling into rest. A prayer or two whispered in the dimness. A murmur of thanks not just for safety but for steadiness. For a life measured not by what it gained, but by how gently it unfolded. And the town slept, not with the uneasy half-consciousness of a place guarding itself, but with the full, trustful surrender of a child in safe arms. Doors were locked, but lightly. Windows were left open to the night's cool breath. The world outside could have changed 1,000 times, but here, tonight, it did not matter. What mattered was the moonlight pooling like pale milk across the thresholds, the soft cadence of insects keeping time, and the quiet assurance that morning would return, slow and golden, just as it always had. By the time the night reached its deepest quiet, the town seemed almost weightless. The stillness was not an absence, but a fullness, as though every tree, every board of every house, every sleeping breath within them carried a soft hum of belonging. The river's slow, steady song continued beyond the edge of the fields, and the breeze shifted slightly, now cool with hints of distant rain. It moved through the streets like a thoughtful guest, brushing gently against shutters, teasing strands of drying herbs that hung beside doorways, setting them to sway like tiny green pendulums, keeping time with the earth's own calm heartbeat. Far in the distance, a wolf howled once, not a threat here, not a warning, but a lonely acknowledgement of night itself, answered after a pause by a faint echo somewhere deep in the woods. It folded back into the quiet like a ripple into still water, leaving only the soft chirr of insects and the occasional hollow knock of a branch shifting in its sleep. Within one house, a baby stirred, releasing a brief, drowsy cry, soon met by the soft rhythm of a mother's footsteps across wooden floors. Her voice, low and warm, wove into the quiet like thread through cloth, and soon the tiny cry faded, replaced by the almost imperceptible hush of new sleep. Down the lane, an old clock ticked steadily, its sound more a heartbeat than a measure, marking moments that mattered only in their gentle passing. The town did not dream of progress or upheaval. It dreamed, if it dreamed at all, of steady seasons, of fields that yielded without famine, of waters that rose and fell without violence, of mornings that arrived softly, like a promise kept without fanfare. For those who lived here, life was not a race toward something better, but a slow, deep settling into what already was a quiet gratitude stitched into every motion, every word, every evening spent beneath a sky unspoiled by haste. The moon reached its highest point, pouring its cold, silver calm across the rooftops, along the winding paths, through the gaps between wooden fences. It painted each surface with a light so soft, it almost seemed to belong to memory rather than to the moment. Anyone awake to witness it might have felt, for just an instant, that they were walking through a story rather than a street. A story not of heroes or battles, but of presence, of being exactly where the world meant them to be. Eventually, even the most wakeful eyes surrendered. The rocking chair on the porch fell still. The last ember in the hearth dimmed to a quiet, fading orange. The town, already slow by day, now moved like a breath held in perfect balance, not inhaled, not released, simply existing between the two. And so the night passed. It did not rush toward dawn. It carried the town gently toward it, like a mother carrying a child still asleep, careful not to wake it. The first faint hint of light touched the far edge of the river, barely perceptible at first, a softening of the black into the gentlest gray. Birds stirred in the hedgerows, their calls tentative, like musicians tuning quietly before a song. One by one, the homes began to glow again. A candle here, a lantern there, flames blooming like small suns, reclaiming their dominion over the dark. The air was cool, damp with morning, but already the smell of hearth smoke returned, not harsh, not urgent, just present, as inevitable as the turning of the earth. Boots met the packed soil once again, slow steps with no need to hurry. The barns opened, their doors groaning softly awake, and animals shifted with quiet familiarity, returning to their roles without prompting. The fields waited patiently for the day's work, still cloaked in mist that hovered like a low ceiling, muffling the world in gentleness. The town greeted its new day the same way it had greeted countless others, not with bells or announcements, but with continuity. It picked up the threads exactly where it had left them, weaving today seamlessly into the fabric of yesterday. To the casual eye, it may have seemed as though nothing had changed. But to those who truly lived within it, each day carried subtle differences. A laugh held a beat longer, a sky a shade lighter, a loaf of bread rising a touch higher, a sigh of wind arriving just before a drop of rain. And perhaps that was its quiet triumph, to be alive not in spite of its sameness, but because of it. The rhythm itself, that slow, steady pulse of planting and gathering, of mending and resting, of greeting and partying, was the meaning. Here, among the candlelit homes and tilled earth, among the soft bells and murmured prayers, life unfolded not as spectacle, but as a steady, nurturing lullaby, one that would carry forward, one heartbeat at a time, into the next century, and the next, and the next. The land stretched wide in every direction, a sea of grasses rolling gently under the weight of an endless sky. Here, the air held a dry clarity, carrying with it the faint temps of dust and sun-warmed earth. In the distance, low hills crouched like quiet giants, their slopes scattered with scrub and wildflowers that clung stubbornly to the soil. It was a place of openness, of space enough for silence to gather, for the heart to slow, for the mind to ease its grip on the busyness of thought. A town had risen here, humble and practical, born from necessity rather than design. Wooden buildings stood in loose clusters along a single main street, their facades plain but honest. Each bore the signs of hands that had built them not for beauty, but for shelter. Saw marks still visible, nails set in slightly crooked lines, boards that creaked softly under a shift of weight. The structures leaned not from weakness, but from adaptation, bending gently into the wind, as if acknowledging its persistent presence. The morning began early, not with alarm or clamor, but with the quiet inevitability of labor. A farmer, his hat already shading eyes used to brightness, stepped out from his modest home and breathed in the cool edge of dawn. The fields stretched far, divided not by fences but by understanding, this portion for wheat, that for grazing, that for the hopeful planting of corn. The soil here was less forgiving than in the green valleys of the east, but it responded to patience, to the steady rhythm of hands that planted carefully, watered cautiously, harvested gratefully. The blacksmith's shop stood near the center of town, a squat building of dark timbers with its wide doors flung open to welcome both air and work. Inside, the forge glowed faintly, coals waiting for the bellows to coax them to life. Tools hung in quiet rows, hammers, tongs, files, each carrying the shine of use, each a companion in the quiet conversation between fire and iron. Soon enough, the first clang of hammer on metal rang out, not sharp, but resonant, as if the town itself had a heartbeat beginning to stir. Along the dusty street, a few early risers moved with unhurried purpose. A woman carried a basket lined with cloth, perhaps bound for the small general store where bolts of cloth leaned against barrels of dried beans, where jars of sugar sat beside crates of nails, where commerce unfolded not with shouting but with gentle exchanges, coins clinking softly, voices barely above the quiet hum of the day. A wagon rolled slowly past, its wheels carving shallow paths into the packed earth. The driver sat high, rein slack in his hands, the two mules below stepping with patient steadiness. There was no rush, there rarely was. Out here, time belonged to the weather, to the soil, to the unpredictable kindness of rain and the steady persistence of wind. The town moved with these forces, never against them, its pace a respectful echo of the land's own slow turning. As the sun climbed, light spilled across the wide street, catching on the tin edges of roofs, glinting in the glass of narrow windows, warming the benches set outside the saloon. The saloon itself, though it bore the name that might suggest noise and raucous laughter in other places, here was a quiet refuge. Its swinging doors shifted softly in the breeze, creaking in a way that seemed less like complaint and more like greeting. Inside, a few chairs rested neatly around tables, marked with the faint rings of cups set down over countless afternoons. The bar held a row of bottles, whiskey, yes, but also jars of preserved fruit, coffee beans sealed in tins, and sometimes, when the weather allowed, a fresh pie cooling in its tin near the window. Life here carried with it a dignity born of endurance. It was not glamorous, nor did it seek to be. The people of this town did not measure themselves by grand gestures or distant recognition. They measured in what held fences that withstood a storm, fields that yielded enough to see the next season through. Friendships forged not by excitement but by the steady layering of trust over time. The afternoon began to warm, the air shimmering faintly above the packed dirt of the street. A child sat on the porch steps, carving a small piece of wood into something that might one day resemble a horse. His sister braided scraps of cloth into a rope nearby, their quiet play marked only by the occasional question, the brief exchange of smiles, The ease of siblings who had only ever known each other's company, and the land's quiet companionship. In this town, as in so many like it scattered across the wide belly of the country, each day carried the weight of work, yes, but also the gentle reassurance of routine. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded more than what was possible. And in that, there was a peace, a stillness not of idleness, but of balance, where effort and rest met in quiet agreement under an open, endless sky. By mid-afternoon, the town's gentle rhythm deepened. The sun stood higher now, its light spilling in broad strokes across the plains, painting the dry grasses in hues of gold and muted green. Heat shimmered faintly above the rooftops, not oppressive, merely a slow reminder of the sun's quiet authority over the land. A soft wind rolled in from the west, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, a whisper of clouds gathering somewhere beyond sight. The general store door opened with a quiet creak. Inside, shelves made of rough pine boards held everything from jars of dried apples to coils of rope, from heavy nails to blocks of salt. A farmer leaned lightly on the counter, discussing seed with the keeper, their conversation unhurried, a trade of not just goods, but trust. The sound of a coin placed gently on the worn wood counter carried like a soft note through the quiet room. Nothing here echoed. Sound seemed to land softly, as though the very air wished not to disturb what peace had settled. Across the street, two men sat on a long bench, their hats tipped low, boots planted steady in the dirt. They spoke of cattle drives, of a neighbor's broken fence, of a calf born just before dawn. Their words, sparse and measured, carried weight not because of drama, but because each one belonged no excess, no noise, only what needed saying, and said in the way of men who had spent their lives with more sky than ceiling above them. At the blacksmith's shop, a wagon wheel leaned against the outer wall, waiting for repair. A young boy, likely his apprentice, swept the floor in slow arcs, the soft scrape of straw bristles against wood blending with the faint hiss of cooling metal. The smith himself worked quietly at the forge, coaxing the iron to yield, not with force alone, but with patience, skill, and the gentle rhythm of a man who had learned long ago that work done steady lasts longer than work done fast. On the outskirts, beyond the last homes, the open land stretched free. Fences marked only what must be kept, leaving the rest to roll endlessly toward the horizon. A few cows grazed in quiet clusters, their tails swishing now and then at flies, their low, soft calls carrying across the fields like slow, lazy echoes. Above them, hawks circled in wide arcs, scanning the land with calm precision. The world moved, but never rushed. In the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, a handful of children recited words from worn primers. Their voices, hesitant but earnest, floated out through the open windows, mingling with the wind. The teacher, a woman with gentle eyes and a voice that held both patience and firmness, moved slowly between the rows of desks, leaning now and then to guide a finger across a line of text, to offer a nod of quiet encouragement. Learning here was not a competition. It was a gift passed gently from one generation to the next, a steady flame kept alive against the wide silence of the frontier. The saloon saw a few more visitors as the day stretched on. Inside, the air carried the smell of pine soap and faint smoke, mingled with the subtle sweetness of a stew simmering at the back. A fiddle rested in the corner, strings catching bits of light from the tall, narrow windows. Occasionally, someone would pick it up, draw the bow lightly across, not to entertain a crowd, but simply to let the notes float for a moment, thin, wistful, beautiful in their impermanence. The sound drifted out onto the street, where it seemed to pause in the warm air before disappearing, absorbed by the vast quiet of the open land. Even the smallest gestures carried weight here. A nod from a passing rider, a wave from a porch, the brief meeting of eyes across the street, each was a kind of language, simple yet deeply understood. In a place where the land itself demanded patience, people learned to carry their lives in a way that matched it. No hurry, no extravagance, only the steady, deliberate weaving of days into a life strong enough to endure both storm and drought, loneliness and bounty. As evening approached, the heat softened. Shadows stretched long across the street, reaching from buildings to meet one another like hands clasped in silent greeting. The wind picked up slightly, teasing loose bits of hay across the packed earth, sending them tumbling in slow, lazy arcs. Somewhere a horse snorted, stamping once, twice, before settling again. The first lamps were lit, their glow warm and faint behind thin curtains, sending small circles of gold out into the deepening blue. The town exhaled. The weight of the day's labor eased, replaced by the slower rhythm of evening, of conversations held on porches, of supper served in tin bowls, of boots set by the door and hats hung on nails hammered crooked into wood. There was no rush toward night, just as there had been no rush toward day. The hours moved like the wind across the plains, steady, present, carrying life gently forward without noise or demand. Night settled slowly, as if reluctant to claim a land still warm from the day's long light. The horizon glowed for a time, a thin line of orange fading to deep purple, before surrendering fully to the quiet of starlight. The sky above stretched unbroken, a dome so vast it seemed to cradle the town itself in its calm embrace. Stars appeared one by one, not hurried, but deliberate, as if each had been given its own moment of quiet introduction. Lanterns flickered gently along the main street, their soft halos barely reaching beyond the porches they guarded. The saloon door swung slowly, the hinges complaining just enough to mark the hour. Inside, the low murmur of conversation held steady. Cards were dealt with the soft whisper of paper against wood. A single fiddle tune, played softly now, wandered through the room like a memory, neither happy nor sad, simply present. A rider came in from the west, his horse breathing slow and heavy, dust clinging to its coat. He tied the reins loosely, patted the animal's neck with quiet familiarity, and stepped onto the wooden planks of the walkway. His boots thudded softly, the sound hollow in the evening air. He exchanged a word with the blacksmith, a nod with the storekeeper, and disappeared into the saloon, folding himself seamlessly into the night's gentle rhythm. Elsewhere, a family gathered on their porch, the day's work set aside. The father leaned back in his chair, creaking slightly as he shifted his weight. The mother rocked slowly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon, though darkness now hid the land. The children sat cross-legged, one tracing patterns in the dust with a stick, another listening, head tilted slightly, as a story from long ago unfolded of rivers far away, of a first harvest, of the sound of rain on a roof built by hand. Crickets had begun their song, a steady, pulsing chorus that filled the spaces between quiet words. Somewhere beyond the town's edge, a coyote called, its voice carrying like a ribbon of sound, stretched across miles of stillness. The cattle stirred faintly in their pens, a soft shuffle of hooves, the muted clang of a gate settling back into place. In the blacksmith's shop, the forge dimmed to a dull red, its heat still whispering into the cooling air. Tools rested in neat rows, their day's service complete. The smith sat on a stool, wiping his hands on a cloth darkened with years of work. Not rushing to leave, simply letting the last moments of warmth fade naturally before closing the doors. The town breathed in the night, unafraid, unguarded. No shadows threatened, no urgency stirred. It was a night like many before, and many to come, a night built of trust in the land, of resilience carved quietly into each soul, of a stillness that soothed as much as it sustained. The world beyond might have been changing, might have been growing louder, faster, brighter, but here, time kept its own measure, untroubled by distant clocks. Sleep came softly. Curtains swayed with the cool breeze slipping through open windows. Dogs circled once or twice before settling at their posts. The last lamplight flickered out, one by one, until only the moon's gentle silver remained, laying quiet patterns across the rooftops, sliding down along fences, touching the earth with a kindness so steady it seemed almost alive. And the town, small and sturdy under a sky of 1,000 stars, gave itself fully to rest, knowing that when the sun returned, it would rise not just on the land, but on the lives carefully, patiently, lovingly built upon it. Dawn returned with a gentleness that belonged entirely to this place. The first light touched the edges of rooftops, found the quiet line of fences, brushed the faces of sleeping horses with the soft weight of morning. The air carried the crispness of night's retreat, the faint smell of dew that clung briefly before the warmth of day would carry it away. The blacksmith was first to rise, as always, his steps sure and familiar along the cool boards of his porch. He paused a moment, leaning against the railing, watching the slow bloom of sunlight stretch across the plains. A single bird called from the eaves above, then another answered from the distance, and soon a thin chorus carried softly into the new day. At the farmsteads, kitchen fires were kindled. The muted sounds of kettles and pans marked the slow return of life. Bread, baked the night before, was sliced in quiet kitchens, while coffee brewed in iron pots. The smell drifting through open windows. Families sat together at plain wooden tables, offering quiet greetings, their voices still low as if not to disturb the lingering calm. Along the main street, doors opened one by one. The storekeeper lifted the latch with care, adjusting the curtain that kept out the glare of late-day sun. The saloon swept its floors, arranging chairs as the first shafts of light spilled through tall, narrow windows. A rider watered his horse at the trough, nodding to a neighbor who tipped his hat in return. The gestures were small, but they carried the weight of community, a language of belonging spoken without a word. Children emerged last, their steps slow with the heaviness of sleep not yet fully gone. They moved toward the small schoolhouse, lunch pails swinging gently at their sides, their laughter beginning like sparks, soft, scattered, then warm enough to light the edges of the morning. The teacher stood at the doorway, smiling in quiet welcome, the rhythm of lessons waiting patiently within. The day unfolded, not with urgency, but with the steady cadence of necessity. The blacksmith's hammer returned to its work. The general store welcomed its first trade. Wagons creaked under the weight of harvest, rolling slowly toward town. Dust drifted lazily behind each set of wheels, the air carrying a dry sweetness that belonged only to wide land and open sky. There was comfort in the repetition, in the honest familiarity of a world that asked only what could be given and gave. In turn, what was needed most: space, time, quiet, and the dignity of work done well. By late morning, sunlight poured freely, and the town stood awake, not bustling, not loud, but fully alive in its own measured way. Here, life was not a race, not a climb, but a walk, slow, steady, enduring, each day, a step, each night, a breath. And beyond it all, the land waited vast and unchanging in its quiet watch. Holding these lives like a gentle palm cradles, something fragile yet strong, something fleeting yet deeply, undeniably real. Part 2 came to its quiet close here, a western town at peace with its place in a country still unfolding, its people, its work, its silence, all threads woven into a fabric that would stretch far into the years ahead. The world was beginning to hum in a new way. It was not a sudden noise, nor was it harsh, at least not at first. It began as a low, steady thrum at the edges of quiet towns, a faint vibration that carried with it the scent of iron, coal, and possibility. Where once fields rolled unbroken toward the horizon, now tracks stretched like long gleaming threads, tying one town gently to the next. The train arrived slowly the first time. People stood at the edge of the platform, not a grand station yet, just a raised stretch of wood, and waited with a quiet curiosity. In the distance, a column of smoke trailed against the pale morning sky. The whistle came next, a long rising call that felt less like a command and more like a question, as if asking permission to enter the silence of the town. The engine appeared, dark and strong, huffing in slow, steady bursts, each exhale carrying the weight of miles traveled. It did not rush. It arrived with dignity, with purpose, like a guest who had come to stay. Shops began to change. Where once the general store had been a single room of stacked barrels and crates, now shelves grew taller, glass jars lined in neat rows, bolts of cloth in more colors than anyone remembered seeing in one place. The soft ring of a small bell marked each arrival, and conversations carried a new kind of curiosity. Stories of what had come in from the city, whispers of goods from distant places, now resting quietly on these humble wooden shelves. The streets remained dirt for now, but the ruts grew deeper, the traffic more steady. Wagons brought not only harvests, but also crates stamped with names of towns no one had ever visited. There was talk, sometimes, of factories, of mills, of machines that could do in an hour what once took a day. But here, the rhythm of work held steady, even as the tools began to change. The blacksmith's hammer still rang, but alongside it came the soft whir of gears, the quiet spin of belts, The hiss of steam, small, tentative sounds of a world shifting, not by force, but by a steady, thoughtful rearrangement. Horses still pulled wagons, but some spoke of engines, of the strange, smoky carriages seen in cities where streets were lined in brick. These conversations were not anxious. They were slow, careful, sometimes punctuated by long silences, where men and women simply watched the horizon, as if waiting to see whether the future would arrive on its own, or if they would need to meet it halfway. The schoolhouse grew. A second room was added, then a small library, its shelves filled with books that smelled faintly of ink and dust and travel. Children still recited from primers, but now there were maps pinned to walls, maps of states and oceans, rivers and rail lines, names written in neat script marking places far beyond the town's quiet reach. A few of the older children, sitting at desks worn smooth by years of use, found themselves staring not at the chalkboard but out the window, toward the tracks, toward the places those tracks might one day take them. Evenings, though, held their familiar calm. Supper was still taken at wooden tables, laughter still softened by the day's fatigue. Lamps were lit not for show, but for warmth, their glow gathering families into gentle circles of conversation. Outside, the town exhaled as it always had. Crickets still sang, wind still carried the scent of fields and rain. But now, faintly, from far off, there might come the low, steady rumble of a train moving somewhere through the night, a reminder that the world was both bigger and closer than it had been. There was comfort in that, strangely, in knowing that life could stretch without breaking, that new sounds could join the old without drowning them out. The town, like the people within it, learned to hold both past and future at once, twofold to change carefully into the rhythm of days that still began with sunrise over quiet fields and ended with the soft closing of doors under a sky full of stars. By the time the second decade of the new century leaned fully into progress, the sound of steel on steel had become a kind of heartbeat for the town, not constant, not deafening, but regular, a soft assurance that the world beyond was turning, that goods and letters and faces could move farther and faster than before. And yet, the town itself kept its gentle pulse. The shift felt more like a tide than a wave, slow, inevitable, calming in its rhythm. At the heart of this shift stood the general store, no longer a mere gathering place for necessities, but now a quiet museum of possibilities. Rows of gleaming oil lamps stood beside jars of candy, tins of tea next to folded shirts, stitched in patterns that hinted of distant hands. People moved slowly through these aisles, touching fabrics they had never owned, smelling spices that carried faint heat from lands they could hardly imagine. Purchases were modest: a bar of soap, a handful of nails, a bolt of cloth for a Sunday dress, but each item carried the weight of a world inching closer, folding itself gently into the town's familiar shape. The post office, once a corner in the general store, now occupied a room of its own. Its walls held shelves of neatly stacked letters, some in loops of graceful script, others in shaky, eager scrawls. Each envelope carried a piece of someone's heart: a father writing from a city job, a brother from a ship at sea, a daughter from a distant school. The arrival of mail became an event, a quiet ceremony where hands trembled a little before breaking a seal, where silence fell as words were read slowly, carefully, as if savoring both the content and the connection itself. Work had changed too, not all at once, but gently, as if out of respect for the way life had always been. A mill rose on the edge of town, its brick walls warm under the sun, its windows catching the light like calm water. Inside, machines turned with steady patience, belts moving like slow rivers, gears clicking softly in rhythm with human hands guiding them. There was no chaos here, no shouting. Even industry, in a place like this, seemed to have learned the language of quiet. The blacksmith's shop still stood, though now beside it sat a workshop where parts of machines were cleaned, polished, repaired. Horses still carried people across the fields, yet a small carriage, powered not by hooves but by steam, occasionally passed along the main street, its hiss and sigh, a gentle announcement of the future slipping politely through town. Children stopped to watch, wide-eyed but not afraid, their fingers tracing the air as if trying to hold on to the shape of what they had just seen. Evenings still drew families to porches and stoops. They spoke of the mill, of the new teacher in the schoolhouse, of the train schedule pinned carefully on a wall by the station. They did not speak in the hurried tones of people overwhelmed by change. They spoke as farmers always had, as townsfolk always would, one thought at a time, each given space to land before the next was born. Sometimes the whistle of a train would drift into these quiet gatherings, a single note stretched long across the cooling fields. It did not intrude. It joined the sounds of the night, the insects, the rustle of leaves, the slow shifting of cattle in their pens, a new instrument folded neatly into the old, as though the night itself had been waiting for this tone to complete its music. In the schoolhouse, lessons now included arithmetic for commerce, geography for a wider world, reading not only for the Bible, but for newspapers, for letters, for stories of people whose names would never pass through the town in person, but whose lives nonetheless brushed softly against its edges. A girl traced a map with her fingertip, pausing on a city name she had never spoken aloud. A boy wrote a careful sentence in ink, the letters crisp, the meaning quiet but full of possibility. The world is wide. The church bell still marked Sundays, its tone rich and familiar, a sound that wrapped the town in gentle arms. The sermons had begun to speak not only of patience and gratitude but of stewardship, of how to carry forward what had been built without losing the stillness that made it worth keeping. There was wisdom in that, spoken slowly, received deeply, carried home in silence. Night returned each day like a soft blanket pulled over tired shoulders. Lamps glowed behind curtains. Children slept with the murmur of trains fading in the distance. Fields lay quiet under a moon that now shone not only on rows of crops, but on rail lines glinting like silver veins stretching outward, carrying a piece of this little place into the great unknown, and carrying pieces of that unknown gently back. Afternoons took on a subtle, different weight. The air, once filled only with the distant calls of livestock or the easy clang of a blacksmith's hammer, now sometimes carried the low, steady hum of machines turning at the mill. A soft undercurrent that no longer felt new, only steady, a sign that work was being done, that progress was quietly, respectfully unfolding. Wagons shared the main street with handcarts, with bicycles that rattled softly over uneven boards, and with the occasional small carriage powered by steam. People noticed, but they did not gawk. They nodded in quiet acknowledgement, letting the future pass like a polite guest, welcomed but never allowed to disturb the peace. A bakery opened, filling the street each morning with the warm scent of bread and cinnamon. Its bell chimed softly when the door swung inward, a tender sound like laughter folded into metal. Children stood on tiptoe to see rows of loaves cooling by the window, the crusts still whispering as they settled. For many, this bakery became a small, happy gravity, a place where mornings began, not with news of the world, but with the familiar sweetness of what hands could create from simple things. The hardware store grew too, its aisles now holding shovels shaped differently, nails forged to different sizes, small tins of paint in colors brighter than the earth tones that had once painted the town. A farmer might pause, turning a tin slowly in his hands, imagining a barn door painted red instead of weathered brown. Not because it was needed, but simply because now it was possible. At the mill, shifts formed not from demand but from kindness. Workers arrived in pairs, in groups of 3, hats pulled low, voices soft in greeting. Inside, the machines turned like clocks that had learned patience, their movements neither rushed nor sluggish, their rhythm aligning with the steady pace of hands that fed and guided them. Steam hissed occasionally, belts sighed as they shifted, but even here the sound of progress came as a murmur, not a roar. The train platform saw more faces now, some unfamiliar, some returning with the glow of stories still warm in their eyes. A man stepped off with a newspaper folded carefully, its ink still sharp, its headlines about places most would never see. He read aloud quietly to a small circle gathered nearby, not for drama, not for urgency, but simply to share, to make the distance a little smaller, the world a little closer, the evening a little less silent. Evenings had begun to hold small wonders. A new lantern design cast steadier light, glowing softer, warmer, pooling on wooden tables like liquid gold. On some nights, a traveling musician might stop in town, playing quietly in the saloon or beneath the wide porch of the general store. People gathered without rush, leaning against posts, folding arms across chests, letting the notes settle into them like rain into thirsty soil. The music never demanded, it offered. Each melody felt like an invitation to breathe more slowly, to let the mind drift like smoke toward the stars. Some evenings, a new invention made its way quietly into town. A phonograph, a novelty at first, then a treasure. It sat on a table in the saloon, a hand crank on one side, a brass horn polished to a soft shine. When it played, the room fell gently still. Voices caught in grooves, carried across miles, seemed almost like ghosts, kind, melodic ghosts, filling the air with songs from cities far away. For a few minutes, the town held its breath, listening not in awe, but in quiet wonder, as if greeting an old friend who had simply never visited before. In the schoolhouse, a new map appeared, stitched with rail lines like veins, dotted with cities that pulsed with industry and light. Children studied it with their chins in their hands, not dreaming of escape, but simply absorbing the shape of a world that was wider, fuller, yet still capable of holding places like their own. The teacher read from books about electricity, about engines, about distant countries, but never quickly, never with pressure, always with the same soft cadence that had guided lessons long before. The future was coming, but here, even the future was welcome to walk slowly. At night, the stars still covered the town like a soft quilt. The trains still passed far enough away to sound like a distant heartbeat, steady, low, dependable. Lanterns were turned down one by one, until only moonlight and the faint smell of coal from the tracks drifted through the quiet streets. Couples sat a little longer on porches, families lingered a little longer at supper, conversations wandered a little farther, and yet, as always, the night closed gently, folding the day into memory, keeping the peace that no progress dared disturb. By the later years of the century, the town no longer felt as though it were waiting for change. It had simply grown into it, naturally, the way a tree grows new rings. No one spoke of progress anymore. It was no longer a visitor. It had settled, quietly, respectfully, as though it had always belonged here, wearing the familiar clothes of daily life. The main street, still wooden in some stretches, now bore lamps that burned with steady light. They came on at dusk with a gentle hiss, replacing the dim flicker of oil with a warm, even glow. The sidewalk seemed to sigh in the evenings, filled with footsteps soft enough to hear the night birds in between. The rhythm of the town had not sped up. It had only gained new notes, quieter, steadier, harmonious. The mill, which had once drawn curious eyes, now stood as solid and unnoticed as the old barns. Its hum was a part of the background, no more startling than wind moving through wheat. Farmers no longer looked twice at the rail lines. They glanced only to note a schedule, then returned to their fields, their tools, their patient conversations about weather and soil. New homes appeared, not grand, but comfortable. Porches were wide, roofs strong, windows tall enough to let in evening air. Curtains swayed gently when trains passed, as though the houses themselves breathed a little deeper when the world outside moved. Kitchens smelled of bread, of coffee, of roasted vegetables gathered from gardens that still stretched behind every home. Even as industry laid its quiet hand across the region, the earth had not been forgotten. Its gifts still made their way to every table, every meal eaten slowly, every prayer spoken softly before it began. A small theater opened, not with curtains of velvet or gilded balconies, but with wooden benches and a simple stage. Traveling players would arrive, bringing with them stories from elsewhere, acting them out with voices that carried to the back row, though never too loud. Sometimes a singer would perform a handful of songs, each one lingering in the air like the aftertaste of honey. People left smiling, not stirred to frenzy, only filled with a quiet gladness that life, though changing, still knew how to pause and share beauty. The town hall held meetings less often about building, and more often about care. Care for the school, for the streets, for those who had fallen ill or lost work. There was a sense now that while the outside world might rush, a town could choose its own pace. It could take what it needed from progress, the rail, the machines, the better tools, without surrendering the slow rhythm that made life gentle. Children who once stared wide-eyed at the sight of a steam carriage now saw it as ordinary as a horse. They still ran across fields, climbed trees, traced shapes in the dirt with sticks, laughed until dusk painted their cheeks cool. The future, in all its quiet inevitability, had not stolen the timeless rituals of childhood. It had simply added a few new ones: a ride on a train, a book printed in a distant city, a story told at night about lights that burned without oil. And at night, the quiet held. No factory whistle pierced it. No crowds disturbed it. Only the steady breath of a town at ease. A town that had learned that change, when guided with care, did not have to roar or crush or sweep away what came before. It could fold itself gently into the existing weave, becoming part of the cloth, a thread of silver through a fabric of brown and gold. The crickets still sang. The moon still cast its silver ribbon across the rooftops. Somewhere a late train whispered by, its wheels like a heartbeat carried on cool air. A lamp flickered softly in a window, then dimmed, then went out. And the town slept, not untouched by progress, but never disturbed by it. It had found, somehow, the rarest of balances, to hold both the new and the old at once, to walk steadily forward without ever letting go of the calm, the softness, the slow turning of days that had always been its truest inheritance. Morning arrived gently, as it always had, but there was something different in the way it unfolded now. A soft rumble sometimes joined the bird calls, not the sound of wagons rolling over boards, nor the distant sigh of a train, but the low, steady growl of a motor car easing down the main street. It did not rush, it wandered, as though even this new invention had learned the town's pace. Tires hummed over gravel, a quiet reminder that the world beyond the fields had not stopped growing, even if this place preferred to take its time. The general store stood a little taller now, its shelves lined with tin signs painted in bright colors, reds, blues, soft creams, advertising goods that came from places unseen. The same wooden floor still creaked underfoot. The same familiar smell of ground coffee and dried herbs lingered. But now there were glass cases with candies in neat rows, tins of biscuits, small bottles of soda with bubbles like captured laughter. Just down the street, a new building with wide windows and a bright white sign had appeared. A movie house. It wasn't grand, no velvet seats or chandeliers, but it felt like a promise, a small doorway through which the world could step into town for an hour at a time. On Saturdays, families gathered outside, leaning on railings, reading the painted posters tacked carefully to the front wall. Silent films flickered in black and white, their frames alive with jittery motion, and inside, the room would go still. Only the gentle whir of the projector and the soft gasps or laughter of the crowd broke the hush. For a little while, stories came alive without a single word spoken, filling the night not with noise, but with wonder. Automobiles were still few, and horses had not vanished. Wagons and buggies tied up outside the grocery store or the bank, their reins draped lazily, their riders in no hurry at all. A man might crank his motor car, then wait for the engine to catch with a reluctant cough, patting the hood like one might calm a spirited horse. Children would watch from a safe distance, eyes wide, giggles hidden behind small hands, as if the machine might suddenly leap like a startled colt. The town's rhythm, even now, had not lost its softness. Sundays still brought families to the church, bells ringing as they always had, a round, mellow tone that drifted across streets and porches and fields. Men tipped hats, women adjusted gloves, children carried small flowers picked from yards or fields, and the town gathered not only for sermons, but for stillness, a kind of collective breath that seemed to hold the week together, no matter how the outside world shifted. Schools now held more books, more subjects, science about the sky, the sea, the hidden pieces of life unseen. A new teacher might bring a globe, spinning it gently, pointing at continents like treasures on a map, their names rolling softly off the tongue like poetry. Children leaned closer, tracing lines of latitude with careful fingers, imagining oceans and deserts, and cities with lights brighter than stars, yet always returning home at the sound of the final bell. Their steps unhurried, their laughter carried on the same familiar air. A small cafe had opened, not much more than a few tables and a counter. But in the evenings, people would sit, sip coffee, talk quietly. The hiss of steam, the clink of cups, The low murmur of conversation formed a kind of music, softer than a train, gentler than the mill's hum, yet somehow as steady, a reminder that life could change in flavor without changing in heart. Evenings belonged, more and more, to quiet gatherings. A gramophone might play softly from a parlor window, the tune thin but warm, as if the horn itself breathed lullabies into the night. Lamps glowed behind curtains, automobiles rested beside barns, horses chewed hay with slow, thoughtful movements, and the moon watched from above, as though approving of the way old and new had learned to share the same small streets. The stars were still there, scattered like quiet promises. The wind still wandered through the fields, carrying with it the faint smell of soil, of distant rain, of the same life that had always been here. The town had changed, yes, but gently, respectfully, folding new moments into old ones without tearing the cloth. And in that softness, in that slow, steady weaving of eras, people found rest, comfort, and the same quiet ease that had always carried them from one day to the next. By mid-century's early decades, the soundscape of the town changed in small, delicate ways. Where once a horse's hooves had been the only rhythm along the streets, there was now the occasional hum of an engine slipping quietly between storefronts. It never seemed hurried. Drivers waved at passers-by, lifting a hand gently from the steering wheel, and those on foot nodded in return, the exchange as slow and courteous as ever. Electric lines had begun to stretch across poles, thin and straight against the sky. They didn't hum loudly, instead, they whispered, carrying invisible currents into kitchens and parlors, replacing the flicker of oil lamps with bulbs that glowed steady, golden calm. At first, people gathered in neighbors' homes to see the new light click on, their eyes adjusting not with surprise, but with quiet appreciation. Another tool to make night softer, reading easier, stitching steadier. The general store grew busier, though not noisy. Its aisles now offered canned goods, packages wrapped in neat paper, jars with labels printed in crisp, tidy fonts. A row of radios appeared on a high shelf, each with knobs like tiny brass buttons, waiting to bring voices from places unseen into rooms that had, until now, known only silence and conversation. The post office hummed gently with the business of a more connected world. Letters came more often, telegrams occasionally ticked through, their words short but heartfelt. A postcard might arrive with a photograph of a city skyline filled with lights, yet the message on the back remained simple, thinking of home. Community gatherings began to take on new flavors. There were still picnics in fields, quilts spread wide, baskets unpacked slowly, laughter floating lazily through warm afternoons. But now there were also town socials held in the new hall, wide wooden floors polished to a soft shine, chairs lined neatly along walls, a band in the corner playing tunes easy to sway to, but never wild. Couples moved in gentle circles, feet gliding, skirts brushing, conversations blending with the music like low wind through tall grass. The movie house now changed its posters more often. Silent films gave way to ones with sound, voices and music spilling softly into the darkened room. Patrons leaned back, letting the stories wash over them like gentle waves. The outside world, busy, bright, buzzing with invention, entered these walls in black and white frames. Yet here it seemed to slow down, adapting to the measured breathing of the crowd, offering excitement that never jarred, only soothed curiosity. Children found delight in simple new wonders. A boy cranked a toy car across the porch, its tiny wheels clicking softly over the boards. A girl traced letters in a new school book, the ink printed in crisp lines, her finger following each curve as if memorizing a dance. The school introduced lessons on electricity, on flight, on maps with lines showing not just railways but new highways spreading like careful stitches across the country. Yet even with these glimpses outward, when the final bell rang, the children walked home at the same unhurried pace, their shoes tapping softly against packed earth, their voices carrying across fences and fields, in tones that had not changed with the times. In the evenings, families gathered not only on porches but around radios, the soft crackle of static giving way to warm, measured voices. They listened to news spoken calmly, to music played with a sweetness that never hurried. A story might unfold in episodes, the kind told in steady arcs, never rushed, never frantic, each word like a footstep on a quiet path. Some evenings, when the radio was off, the silence returned just as easily, like a friend stepping back into a familiar room. Church bells still rang on Sundays. The tone was the same, deep, rounded, a sound that folded through the air like a blanket being shaken gently open. Services spoke now of the wider world, of neighbors far away, of gratitude not only for rain and harvest but for peace, for connection, for the delicate balance between holding on and letting go. And night, as always, fell with kindness. Streetlights glowed like pearls along the main road, spaced widely enough to leave shadows deep and stars bright. Windows dimmed one by one, curtains drawn with soft sighs, as if the town itself exhaled the day. In the stillness, a motor car might pass, its tires crunching softly over gravel, its engine low and patient, like a lullaby for streets long accustomed to sleep. Nothing in the town shouted, nothing hurried. Even as the world outside turned faster, noisier, brighter, here the air remained calm. Here progress tiptoed, never trampling, always asking permission, and the town, ever gentle, ever steady, gave it with a smile. Then went on with its quiet living, a small place holding both past and present like two hands folded lightly together. By the time a generation had grown up knowing electricity, the novelty had faded into something more valuable: comfort. Lamps clicked on at dusk with no fanfare. Radios hummed softly in corners. The hum of progress had become the hush of normal life. The streets, once hushed after sundown, now held a quiet rhythm even in the evenings. A car or two might roll through, its headlights cutting gentle arcs across wooden storefronts, then fading as though swallowed by the dark beyond town. Horses still stood tied at posts, chewing hay with steady patience, neither startled nor hurried by the newer machines that passed them. Shop windows changed more often. Behind the glass, mannequins wore coats sewn in factories far away, hats with brims curled in modern lines, shoes with laces thinner, softer. These were not urgent temptations. They were gentle reminders that the world was widening, that choices multiplied without demanding they be taken. The same barrels of flour, the same sacks of seed, still lined the back walls, unchanged, dependable, like the steady heartbeat of the town. A new cafe on the corner served coffee in cups thin and pale, china with hairline blue rings painted near the rim. People lingered there on cool evenings, leaning forward over tables, their words measured, voices low. They spoke of harvests, of school projects, of letters from children who had gone to cities for work, of prices for hay and coal, of the weather, always the weather. The cafe did not buzz, it breathed. Its door chime rang softly, the hiss of steam gentle enough to fold into the sound of boots shifting on wood. Social gatherings had grown into habits. There were now organized dances twice a month in the hall, no longer just for holidays. The band had learned newer songs, not wild jazz from the coasts, but softened versions, gentle shuffles, melodies that swayed like tall grass in a summer wind. Couples glided, children sat cross-legged along the edges, wide-eyed, learning the slow choreography of community. At the movie house, newsreels played before features. Grainy films showed faraway events, speeches, parades, even airplanes flickering in gray light, while the crowd watched with quiet curiosity. There was no applause, no gasping, only a hum of whispered comments, like leaves stirring. The stories from beyond never seemed to pierce the cocoon of the town. They brushed against it, then drifted on. Schools expanded. Classrooms now had blackboards, smooth as slate, maps with brighter inks, small glass cases with simple science tools, magnifiers, slides, small brass instruments to measure things unseen. Teachers, many young, carried books under arms, spoke with a calm authority that held both respect and warmth. They taught arithmetic for new trades, history for perspective, civics for a country changing shape, but they taught it all at the same speed as before, one idea at a time, pauses long enough for each to settle, like seeds spaced carefully in tilled soil. The church choir added more voices, some songs with harmonies carried from places far beyond. Yet even the new music moved like a slow river, steady, unforced, comforting. After services, the congregation spilled gently into the street, shaking hands, trading short phrases, then dispersing like soft clouds, pulled apart by an easy wind. Evenings at home carried a new warmth. Some families now owned phonographs, their cranks wound with care, their discs spinning with faint scratches and quiet melodies. Children sat cross-legged near the horn, leaning toward the sound as though catching a whisper meant only for them. Others read by steady light, the soft turn of pages mingling with the low hum of night insects just outside. Outside, the town's edges still dissolved into fields. The smell of cut grass and soil fresh from rain still drifted in through open windows. The new lines, telegraph, telephone, electric, stretched away like threads drawn through cloth, but they made no noise at all. They carried the world in, but they never carried the town out. It remained here, rooted, still protective of its own slow heartbeat. And as darkness folded over rooftops, the only sound was the occasional crunch of gravel under a car returning home late. Its headlights dimmed early to spare sleeping neighbors. Curtains fluttered once, then settled. The sky widened above, its stars no fewer than before, its moon as constant as memory, bathing the town in the same pale calm that had watched over every generation since the first planks were laid. In that silver quiet, the future waited patiently. It did not hurry. It sat with the town like an old friend on a porch, hands folded, rocking slowly, knowing that here, in this soft place, even progress learned to breathe in rhythm with the night. By the time another decade slid gently into place, the town had the look of quiet familiarity dressed in new clothes. There were more cars now, but they did not flood the streets. They rolled through one at a time, each engine purring low, like a well-fed cat slipping across a warm floor. Their wheels traced the same paths wagons had worn into the earth, only now the ruts had been filled and leveled. A soft compromise between old travel and new. Street lamps stood at even intervals, their light not harsh, but round and calm. When dusk fell, they came alive without drama, a soft pop and glow, their halos spilling across storefront windows. Moths danced lazily around them, just as they had around lanterns before. The quiet of the night unbroken, the stars still able to shine between each circle of man-made light. The hardware store had taken on shelves for electrical fittings, cords and bulbs in neat boxes. Next to the nails and hinges, coils of wire waited patiently for someone building, repairing, extending the invisible threads that now carried voices and light through walls. The blacksmith still worked, but less with horseshoes and more with tools and hinges. The clang of his hammer, a familiar heartbeat in a world slowly turning to softer, quieter work. A small library had opened in what was once a storage room behind the town hall. Rows of books lined simple wooden shelves, spines facing outward like promises. People came in after supper, taking volumes gently, turning pages with care. No one rushed, even curiosity obeyed the town's unspoken rhythm. Each new idea savored like a slow sip of tea. The cafe gained a radio of its own. Sometimes in the evenings, music drifted softly out the open door. Patrons sat with coffee cooling in cups, listening together not for news but for songs. A singer's voice from far away, a quiet band playing through static that sounded like distant rain. Nobody applauded when the song ended. They just breathed a little deeper, let the moment settle, then carried on with their soft conversations about the weather, about neighbors, about nothing urgent at all. Community gatherings now included small fairs, their colors bright but their movements gentle. Children held paper cones of sugar spun into threads, eyes wide at the slow turning of a carousel. Horses, painted carefully on wooden poles, rose and fell with a rhythm soothing enough to lull a toddler against a parent's shoulder. Music from a brass band carried across the grounds, each note rounded and warm, never sharp, never hurried. At home, evenings had layers of quiet. A phonograph might play low in the background, a song learned by heart but never sung aloud. A child might sit by the window, tracing with a fingertip the slow arc of the moon. Someone might read a newspaper headline from faraway cities building taller, ships sailing faster, but the words were spoken with the same tone used to mention tomorrow's breakfast. The world was moving, but here, it still chose its steps carefully. There were moments when progress felt like a guest at the table, electricity humming in the walls, the soft click of a switch replacing the strike of a match, the deep voice of a radio announcer reading the day's news to a room otherwise silent. But the guests never stayed too long. After the broadcast, someone would turn the knob, let the static fade, and the familiar symphony of crickets, frogs, and night wind returned like an old friend stepping back into the room. Church services remained anchors. Bells rang, doors opened, voices mingled in hymns that rose like warm air and drifted gently against the high ceiling. Newer songs joined the older ones, but they carried the same slow cadence, the same invitation to breathe, to rest, to be held by something steadier than time. And at the end of each day, the town exhaled into sleep. Cars tucked into garages, horses shifted in their stalls, lamps dimmed, radios clicked silent. The quiet did not feel like absence. It felt like presence, the presence of care, of balance, of a place that had allowed the modern world in but never let it unsettle the tender pulse of life. The moon climbed higher, casting soft silver across rooftops and streets. Somewhere, a single motor car passed, its tires crunching softly, then fading. A door clicked shut, a curtain drew closed. A breeze carried the faint smell of hay and earth and night-blooming flowers. And everything, as always, came to rest a town early in the new century, breathing slowly, content in its gentle weaving of yesterday and tomorrow. Morning sunlight pours slowly over rooftops that have stood for more than 100 years. Some have been repaired, painted, improved, but their angles, their gentle slopes, still echo the hands of those who built them generations ago. The streets below, paved now with smooth asphalt, still follow the same curves drawn when horses were the only traffic, bending softly around a church, a square, a stream. Cars pass by, but rarely fast. Their tires hum, not roar. The sound is steady, patient, as if the vehicles themselves have learned that there is no need to hurry here. Stop signs are respected not because of law alone, but because neighbors recognize each other through the windshield. Lifting a hand in a quiet greeting, a silent reminder, we belong to one another here. Shops open slowly. A bakery unlocks its door, letting out a wave of warm, yeasty air that drifts across the sidewalk. A florist props open a window, flowers nodding gently in the morning breeze. Their colors bright but not loud, their scent folding into the calm air like a secret shared between old friends. The general store, modern now, carries batteries and paper towels. But the wooden counter, polished smooth by years of elbows and coins, remains. The bell above the door still chimes when someone enters. A soft, familiar sound that reassures as much as it announces. Tourists sometimes appear, drawn by brochures that promise charm. They arrive in pairs, sometimes in families, wearing cameras, sunglasses, sandals that click gently on sidewalks. They look up at painted murals, at brickwork, at lampposts decorated for the season. They whisper to each other about how peaceful it feels here, as though they've stepped into a storybook. Though the people who live here know it is simply life, not a performance, a way of moving through days without shaking loose what makes them worth remembering. The cafe serves lattes now, alongside black coffee poured from glass pots into thick ceramic mugs. Students open laptops at tables where their grandparents once played checkers. A waitress wipes down the counter in slow, even strokes, nodding at regulars who settle onto stools, trading quiet words about weather, gardens, grandchildren, the upcoming parade. The hiss of milk steaming is soft, almost like a sigh, weaving easily into the low murmur of conversation. The scrape of chairs across wood. On the edge of town, houses built in the last few decades stand with porches wide enough for chairs and swings. Children ride bicycles in slow loops, the whir of their wheels mingling with the faint hum of bees in nearby flower beds. Lawns are trimmed but never manicured into strict lines. Gardens spill over edges, herbs and wildflowers mixing as freely as the stories told on those porches when the sun lowers and air cools. The town square holds a farmer's market on Saturdays. Stalls of fresh vegetables, homemade jams, hand-carved crafts fill the space once reserved for wagons. People browse at a measured pace, tasting a berry, asking a question, exchanging cash or cards with the same ease they used to exchange smiles. A local musician strums a guitar softly in the corner, singing low, the melody threading gently through the warm air like smoke from a slow fire. Technology has settled in, without pushing out the quiet. Wi-Fi hums invisibly through the streets, but there are no blinking neon signs, no giant screens shouting for attention. Phones vibrate quietly in pockets, consulted when needed, ignored when not. Conversations still happen face to face, in full sentences, with pauses. Even the digital world seems to slow its pulse when it enters town, as though compelled to match the rhythm here. Evening returns with an easy slide of gold across rooftops. Lamps flicker on LED bulbs now, efficient, long-lasting, yet their glow is still warm, still soft. Children are called in by gentle voices from porches, bikes leaned against fences, doors closing with careful clicks rather than slams. The bakery's last trays are washed, the florist waters blooms for the night. The cafe stacks chairs and the square empties without hurry, leaving only the steady echo of crickets beginning their nightly hymn. And the town exhales. It does not grow silent all at once, but like a candle's flame dimming, the noise of the day thins into stillness. Cars stop, windows glow gently. Somewhere a dog lets out a low bark, not alarmed, just conversational. Somewhere else, music comes softly from a radio, drifting through an open window into the street, like the memory of a dance that never needed to end. The night belongs to no one and to everyone. The stars above do not fight with city lights here. They shine as they always have, steady, quiet, endless. The moon leans over the rooftops like an old friend, and the town, modern though it may be, carries in its bones the slow rhythm of centuries past, a reminder that progress, when welcomed gently, can walk alongside peace without ever disturbing its sleep. Morning in the middle of the week has a certain quiet of its own. It is not the same as the hush of Sunday or the lazy calm of Saturday. It is a rhythm that belongs to working people and wandering souls. A rhythm that knows what it needs to do, yet never hurries to get there. The post office is one of the first to stir. Its flag is raised with a soft snap of cloth, the sound no louder than the wind tugging gently at a loose screen door. A postal worker in a tidy uniform steps out, glances at the sky as though consulting an old friend about the likelihood of rain, then begins the simple ceremony of sorting envelopes, slipping packages into canvas sacks, setting them into a truck that will hum down streets too narrow to invite speed. Across the square, a school bus arrives with the patience of a heron gliding to a stop. Children descend in small clusters, backpacks swinging lightly, voices low but cheerful. They move in gentle lines toward a school that has stood for generations. The brick may have been replaced, the windows modernized, but the bell that rings to start the day has the same slow chime, the same unhurried invitation to learn. Inside, teachers greet students by name, chalk, or now dry erase markers, tracing letters and numbers in a rhythm as steady as rainfall. Lessons are given like gifts, unwrapped slowly, understood in silence, shared in whispers. The town's park sits under a canopy of trees old enough to have seen every phase of this place. Their trunks hold stories in their rings. Their branches sway softly in breezes that carry the faint perfume of blooming clover. Benches wait without urgency. A gardener in a white hat kneels, tending a flower bed with the kind of deliberate care that feels like conversation with the soil itself. Dogs on leashes lead their owners in slow arcs around the walking path, paws and feet leaving paired impressions in soft dust. Near noon, the diner fills, though never quite becomes crowded. People gather at booths, at stools, at tables by the wide front window. Sandwiches are ordered in voices that never rise above the low clink of forks against plates. Someone laughs, not sharply, but warmly, the sound joining others like overlapping waves that never break. A waitress tops off coffee mugs, steam curling into the air like quiet punctuation. No one checks a watch. No one needs to. Time here keeps itself. On Thursdays, the town hosts a little craft fair. Tables are set up in the community hall, quilts folded neatly, jars of honey lined in neat rows, small wooden toys stacked with care. The air smells faintly of cinnamon from baked goods cooling on trays. Shoppers move slowly, fingers tracing fabric, pausing to admire carved birds, to sample a cookie, to listen politely as a vendor explains the story behind a handmade bowl. Purchases are made not out of urgency, but from a desire to keep the circle of making and sharing alive. Later in the day, the school bus retraces its route, dropping children off in front of tidy houses with porches large enough for swinging benches. Some children go straight inside, others linger, chalking games onto the sidewalk, laughing softly when a breeze scatters their hopscotch numbers into faint clouds of color. Parents step out now and then, leaning on railings, sipping tea, exchanging gentle words with neighbors across low fences. In the evening, the library lights glow warmly, a beacon for anyone who wishes to lose themselves in the hush of pages turning. Inside, a librarian moves quietly between shelves, reshelving books, recommending stories in a voice that barely needs to rise. Chairs are soft, corners cozy, the smell of paper and ink familiar and calm. A reader may stay for hours, the world outside continuing its slow turn, without ever pressing against the glass. Occasionally, a festival brightens the town's calm, like lanterns strung along a path. There might be a fall harvest gathering with pumpkins and cider, or a spring celebration where handmade kites catch the soft wind and tilt lazily across the open sky. These events never rush, never crowd. They bloom like flowers, full of color yet somehow still gentle, as if joy here knows it must also be quiet to last. As night approaches, lights along the main street glow in soft succession. Couples stroll, not because they must, but because the air is kind, the streets are safe, and there is something soothing about walking nowhere in particular with someone whose steps you know. Shopkeepers lower blinds slowly, sweep their doorways, pause to chat with a neighbor about the day's small moments, a cat rescued from a tree, a shipment arriving early, a new family moving in. And as the first stars wink through the darkening blue, the town seems to sigh with satisfaction. Nothing urgent has happened, yet everything has mattered. Bread baked, letters delivered, lessons learned, laughter shared. It is the kind of day that feels full without being loud. The kind of day that settles in the bones like a lullaby with no words, only rhythm, only warmth. Late afternoon sunlight stretches itself across rooftops and windows, pulling long, gentle shadows across the quiet streets. The town does not grow busier as the day leans toward evening. It softens. Workplaces finish with a quiet dignity. No horns, no rush, just the soft shuffle of closing drawers. The light tap of a sign turned from open to closed, the slow hum of a fan settling to silence. A couple of teenagers ride their bikes past the town hall, tires whispering on pavement, the rhythm of the spokes sounding like a lullaby played by invisible fingers. They don't race, they don't shout, they glide side by side, pausing now and then to talk in low voices, as if even their excitement understands the need for gentleness here. On a porch, someone strums a guitar. No performance, no audience, just a melody carried lazily into the warm air, each note floating like a feather on a still breeze. A neighbor, hearing the music, leans back in a rocking chair and closes their eyes, letting the tune wrap around them like an old quilt. Near the edge of town, where the houses thin and fields begin, a tractor moves slowly across a small plot of farmland, still held by the same family for generations. The hum of its engine is steady, low, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Birds dip and rise above the freshly turned soil, their wings catching late sun in flashes of silver and white. At the park, benches hold quiet conversations. An elderly man tells a story that he has told before, and his companion listens as though it is the first time, nodding, smiling softly at the familiar turns of phrase. A group of children builds a fort from fallen branches, speaking in whispers as though their play might shatter the calm if it grows too loud. A dog sleeps in the grass, paws twitching in some pleasant dream. As the air cools, the bakery sets out a final tray of rolls, the smell drifting down the street like a slow-moving invitation. A couple pauses, steps inside, and leaves with a paper bag warm against their palms. They walk home slowly, no need to rush the simple joy of fresh bread. The town's diner begins to fill again, not crowded, never hurried. Plates slide gently onto tables, knives and forks make a quiet chorus against porcelain. Conversations stay low, polite, warm. The waitress knows most of the names, knows how they take their coffee, knows who likes an extra napkin and who doesn't need to be asked if they want dessert. The answer is always yes, with a smile. Down the street, a small art gallery hosts a new display. Photographs of the town taken decades apart, hung side by side to show what has changed and what has lovingly remained the same. Visitors step through in twos and threes, speaking softly, pointing out familiar corners. A tree that has grown taller, a building that has kept its face while everything around it has shifted. Each image is a reminder. Progress and memory can share the same frame without conflict. By the time the sun begins to touch the horizon, a hush settles naturally, like a blanket pulled up over the town's shoulders. The sky blushes with streaks of pink and lavender, fading into a deep, patient blue. Street lamps hum, awake one by one, each casting a soft halo on sidewalks, where footsteps sound round and hollow in the evening stillness. Couples stroll past shop fronts, fingers loosely intertwined. A child clutches a soft toy in one hand, their other hand held by a parent. Eyes wide at the lights, the smell of flowers still fresh from the florist's bucket set outside. Two friends pause by a fountain, watching the water rise and fall in slow arcs. The splash soft enough to blend with the night's growing chorus of insects. And somewhere, a clock tower chimes, not loudly, not mechanically, but with a tone like warm metal, a sound that seems to settle into the chest rather than the ears. Each note floats outward and then disappears into the quiet, as though it never wanted to linger too long. Just long enough to say, evening is here, everything is safe, you can rest. Night arrives like a whisper, not a curtain dropping, but a slow deepening of tone, a gentle shift from one peaceful shade into another. The last sliver of sunset melts into the horizon, until the town is held in a soft twilight, the kind that does not hurry the stars, but invites them patiently, one by one. Windows glow, curtains sway lightly with the night breeze that snakes its way through half-open panes. Inside those houses, life unwinds with the same quiet patience that has guided this town for generations. Someone stirs a pot on the stove, the gentle bubbling of soup sounding like rain on distant leaves. Someone else folds laundry, the rhythm of fabric meeting fabric in steady, deliberate motions. A child is read to in a voice soft and round, each word falling like a small pebble into a still pond, spreading calm rings through a tired little body ready to drift into dreams. The streets themselves seem to breathe. Cars are parked neatly along curbs, their metals still holding the day's warmth. Occasionally, a pair of headlights glides across the road, cutting a beam through the quiet, then vanishing like a comet. A cyclist coasts by, not racing, just enjoying the clean air. The way the pavement hums beneath the tires, the way the cool night air feels like a soft scarf around the neck. In the square, a single cafe keeps its doors open, just a little later than the others. Inside, a handful of friends gather around a small table, sipping tea and speaking in the low tones of people who have no need to compete with silence. Their laughter is muffled, not out of obligation, but because there is something about the night that asks for gentleness, even from joy. A lone musician plucks a quiet melody in the corner, not for a crowd but for the room itself, the notes spiraling up to rest against the wooden beams before dissolving into the warm air. Somewhere on the edge of town, near where the farmland begins, a pond reflects the moon with perfect clarity. Frogs add their voices, not urgently, but in a slow, rolling rhythm, as though the night itself is singing a lullaby to the earth. Fireflies blink lazily, their tiny lanterns winking here and there like small, patient stars wandering just above the grass. Church bells ring once, not for ceremony, but as a gentle marker of time. The tone drifts through the air, bouncing softly off the facades of brick and wood, sliding across rooftops, landing finally in the listening night like a warm exhale. Even those awake barely register the sound, not because they do not hear it, but because it has become part of the fabric of living here, as natural and expected as the steady beat of one's own heart. The library closes, the last reader slipping a borrowed book under an arm, nodding a quiet thank you to the librarian, who switches off the lamps row by row. The glow through the windows dims, leaving only the soft halo of the street lamp outside to keep company with the door. The silence that follows is not empty, it is full of pages still breathing quietly in the dark, full of stories asleep but waiting, full of the promise that tomorrow will unfold as gently as today has closed. Up on the hill, a house with a porch light still on rocks, slowly in the breeze. Or perhaps it's the chair, creaking gently, as someone sits with a blanket draped over their knees, eyes tracing the path of the moon across the sky. A dog at their feet sighs, content, tail thumping once, then settling into stillness again. Together, they watched the night deepen, not needing words, not needing anything at all but this shared, perfect pause. And so the town, modern yet timeless, drifts toward sleep. One by one, lights blink out, conversations dwindle, doors close with careful hands. The hum of refrigerators, the ticking of clocks, the faint whoosh of distant traffic, these become the softest percussion to the melody of rest. Above, the stars gather in quiet constellations. Below, the streets lie empty but never lonely, holding in their cool pavement the day's laughter, footsteps, whispers, and promises. The moon leans closer, washing the town in silver, and all at once the centuries behind and ahead seem to meet in this still moment, this gentle night where progress, memory, and peace hold each other tenderly. Nothing here hurries, nothing demands. Everything, from the soft click of a porch light to the steady song of crickets in the fields, is a reminder that even in a modern world, there are places where the heartbeat of life can still be slow, can still be kind, can still be trusted to carry us quietly into sleep. Evening here does not arrive with drama. It eases in like a hand resting gently on a shoulder, a soft reminder that the day has done enough. The light thins until it is not quite gone, just folded into itself, gold slipping into gray, gray softening into blue. The town begins to glow, not from the sun, but from its own quiet constellation of windows, porches, and street lamps, each one a little island of warmth in the gathering dark. You can almost hear the shift. The air cools, a slow exhale carrying the faint smell of cut grass, wood smoke, and soil that has released the day's heat. Insects take up their soft chorus, 1,000 tiny musicians tuning in unison, each playing a single steady note. Frogs lend their bass, steady and round. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounds not urgent, not sharp, just a deep, low echo that rolls across the fields like a memory rather than a message. Houses settle. Wood creaks softly as it adjusts to the cooling air. A screen door clicks shut somewhere down the street. Then all is still again. From a kitchen window comes the sound of dishes being rinsed, water running with the gentle rhythm of a lullaby. A television murmurs in another home, not loud enough to carry words, only the soothing cadence of conversation and laughter, too far away to disturb. Children, freshly bathed, climb into beds still warm from the day's sunlight. A parent tucks them in with the kind of patience that does not rush even a single corner of a blanket. A story is read, perhaps the same one read the night before, and the night before that, and the child does not mind, nor does the parent, because here, repetition is comfort, and familiarity is love made visible. The town square is empty now, save for the fountain's steady rise and fall of water. It does not sparkle under neon, but glimmers under the moon, a silver arc falling into a round, calm basin. The benches sit quietly, as if waiting for tomorrow's conversations. Street lamps buzz faintly, their halos catching the occasional moth drifting by like slow, lazy snow. A breeze stirs through the narrow streets, coaxing loose leaves to slide gently along the pavement. They move not with the scraping urgency of autumn storms, but with a soft, rolling shuffle, the town's own quiet applause for the night's arrival. Curtains sway in second-story windows. The scent of baking bread or cooling pie drifts out and mingles with the night air. The kind of smell that feels like a welcome even when no door opens. Along the outskirts, fields stretch out like dark seas, rippling only when the wind bends the tall grasses. The moonlight lays across them like a silk cloth, catching on each blade, turning the ordinary into something sacred, if only for a few silent hours. Farmhouses glow faintly in the distance, their porches dotted with rocking chairs, sometimes occupied by figures sitting still, watching, listening, breathing. A church bell chimes the hour. The sound is low, round, kind. It does not command, it reminds, it says quietly, another hour has passed, and all is well. Somewhere a dog answers with a single, contented bark, then curls back into itself, nose tucked into tail, the steady rhythm of sleep already claiming it. The town breathes with the people who built it, who tend it, who love it by simply living in it without trying to make it more than it needs to be. It does not shout into the night, it whispers. It does not rush the darkness away with noise and glare. It trusts the stars to be enough, and the stars answer. They scatter themselves generously across the velvet sky, the kind of sky you can only see when a place is humble enough to stay dark, to stay still, to stay gentle. Here, in this quiet, a listener might feel something stir, not excitement, not nostalgia exactly, but something like gratitude braided with rest. A reminder that the world is often loud, often hurried, often sharp, but not always. Not here, not tonight. Here there is a rhythm slow enough for the heart to match, safe enough for the mind to let go, soft enough for sleep to approach without fear. Night deepens in slow, gentle layers. It does not fall. It drifts like fine ash from an invisible fire, softening every edge, dimming every corner, settling over rooftops, over gardens, over narrow streets that now lie quiet and unhurried. If you walk outside, you feel the change not as a jolt, but as a calm embrace, a cooler breath against your cheeks, a stillness in the air that seems to hum with its own hidden music. The town has given itself to silence, but it is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of belonging. Sounds still live here. A porch swing creaks lightly as it rocks without a push. A screen door sighs as it settles back into its frame. A wind chime whispers a few tired notes before hanging still again. Farther away, a freight train sighs along distant tracks, its metal wheels singing a lullaby of weight and motion. It is a reminder that the world beyond continues to turn, yet it does not disturb this pocket of rest. Inside homes, light pools in soft squares on kitchen tables. A glass of water is set down with care, the sound barely breaking the hush. A book page is turned, its thin paper rustling like dry leaves in a mild wind. Somewhere a soft laugh is shared to people speaking in low tones, recounting something small and sweet from earlier in the day. The laughter lingers for a moment, then dissolves into quiet, leaving only the steady beat of the clock on the mantelpiece, keeping time not for urgency, but for comfort. The town feels smaller at night, in the best way. Streets that seemed wide in daylight now feel like narrow hallways between neighbors. The moonlight guides the way, not sharp but clear, turning sidewalks silver, turning parked cars into sleeping animals. In alleys, cats move with the liquid grace of shadows come to life, pausing occasionally to listen, then resuming their quiet patrols. In bedrooms, breaths slow. Sheets rustle softly as bodies shift toward comfort. A ceiling fan turns lazily, each rotation slicing through the warm air, leaving a cool trail behind. Curtains rise and fall with the night's soft exhale. Some windows remain open, allowing the cool night to wander in, carrying with it the distant sound of crickets, the smell of damp earth, the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers. Somewhere on a hill, a house keeps a single light on, perhaps for someone not yet ready for sleep. They sit in a chair by the window, looking out over the town's quiet grid, watching the rhythm of life slow into stillness. They do not think hard, do not worry, do not plan. They simply sit, breathing, listening, watching the world in its gentlest form. It is enough. The church steeple catches the moonlight and holds it like a lantern for the town. Its bell remains still now, but even in its quiet, it carries a kind of presence, a sentinel not of defense, but of reassurance. The tall oaks around it shift slightly in the breeze, their leaves brushing together like the soft sound of distant rain. At the very edges of the town, where pavement gives way to dirt, where fences yield to fields, the night becomes a hymn. Wind flows over the grasses in long, even waves, each bending stalk singing in harmony with its neighbor. An owl calls, low and deliberate, a single note released into the darkness like a coin dropped into a deep well. Somewhere, water moves a creek, hidden but steady, its surface disturbed now and then by a fish or frog returning to stillness after some invisible motion. Everything, everywhere, feels unhurried, unguarded, safe. This is a night that holds you, gently, without condition. It does not ask you to stay awake, it does not ask you to think. It only lays its cool hand across your brow and waits patiently while your heartbeat softens. Your breaths deepen, your eyelids grow heavier. In this moment, in this small town, under this quiet sky, time itself seems to sigh, content to pause. The stars above continue their endless journey, but their light feels as though it lingers just for you. As though the universe, vast and busy and unknowable, has bent close for a while, to share in the comfort of stillness. Midnight does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, almost unnoticed, like a soft tide sliding across smooth sand. The town does not stir to meet it. It simply folds itself deeper into the comfort of night. Streets already quiet grow quieter still. Even the usual hum of faraway cars fades until the sound of a single engine feels like a visitor, not an interruption. The moon now sits high, bright but tender, its light stretched thin, spilling like milk across rooftops, fences, and the wide, patient river that curves at the edge of town. On its surface, the moon dances in fractured shapes, broken by the slow current, gathering itself again downstream. The river moves without urgency, whispering against its banks, a language as old as the earth and just as calm. Porches cradle their rocking chairs in stillness. Empty swings dangle slightly, stirred now and then by the faintest wind, as if they remember the weight of someone sitting there earlier, talking softly about nothing in particular, or simply rocking and looking out at the town in content silence. The smell of night jasmine rides that breeze, weaving gently into everything, a fragrance like a memory you cannot quite place but would never wish to lose. The town's lone streetlight at the far corner hums faintly, its halo of warm light catching the gentle fall of moths looping through their delicate circles. Beneath it, the road looks like a river of silver dust, carrying no one, leading everywhere and nowhere at once. A small fox crosses there unhurried, glancing once, ears twitching at the distant croak of frogs, before slipping back into the tall grass as quietly as it came. Inside, dreams have begun their quiet work. Children lie curled under blankets, their soft breaths a kind of music only the night understands. Adults to drift into a sleep that is not heavy but deep, a sleep that feels like floating, like resting in the arms of a place that has decided, just for a while, to hold all its people gently. Somewhere a clock ticks, not loud, not stern, just a heartbeat made of gears and care. Its hands move as though they understand the worth of slowness. Midnight passes. A few lights remain in upstairs windows, glowing faintly like forgotten stars, waiting patiently for their turn to dim. Perhaps someone reads, eyes trailing slowly across a page, no longer following the story, only feeling the rhythm of words. Perhaps someone simply lies awake, not from worry, but from wonder at how quiet the world can become when nothing demands to be heard. The town feels lighter now, as if sleep itself has weight, and that weight has settled evenly, comfortably, across streets, rooftops, lawns, and fields. Even animals seem to have given in, no more barking, no restless hooves, no clattering of wings. The night holds everything steady, like a hand on a child's back, reminding it to breathe, to rest, to trust the softness of this hour. Far above, the stars glow with a patience so deep it feels like affection. They do not rush their twinkle. They do not compete. They burn quietly, steadily, scattering their cold fire across a sky so wide and so calm it feels like an endless ceiling stretched, just for this one town, just for this one night. And if you listen closely, if you allow your own breathing to fall in line with the rhythm of the crickets, the frogs, the river, the clock, you may begin to feel the boundaries of yourself blur just a little. Not gone, not lost, only loosened, as though the small concerns of the day, the edges of thought, the weight of expectation, all slide gently away, like shoes slipped off after a long walk. What remains is only breath, only warmth, only the soft agreement between body and night. Here is safety, here is rest. Here is the peace we rarely notice until it settles over us like this, like a quilt stitched by every quiet hour that has ever passed through this place. Time does not vanish. It stretches, soft and endless. The night does not demand sleep, but it offers it a gentle, persistent offering, like a hand held out in the dark, waiting, steady, certain, and soon, without even realizing when or how, you take it. Your thoughts drift like the wind through empty streets. Your heartbeat slows, and the town, the night, the world folds in around you, like a mother pulling a blanket up to your chin. And all that is left is the sound of the night breathing deep, slow, endless, carrying you softly, without effort, into dreams that feel like home. The deepest part of the night arrives quietly. It does not knock, does not signal its presence with sound or light. It is simply there, a deeper shade of blue drawn softly over the town, like a blanket pulled higher on a sleeping child. Every roofline, every tree, every fence and sign feels folded into this stillness. The quiet is no longer the absence of noise. It has become its own kind of music, a low, steady hum beneath the stars, a lullaby written in breath and moonlight. Clouds have drifted away now, leaving the sky wide and open. A dome scattered with stars so numerous and so gentle, they seem almost like grains of salt spilled carelessly across dark cloth. They blink without hurry, without pattern, without need. They are simply there, steady, eternal, softly generous. The moon has shifted slightly, a few degrees on its long path, but here it seems to hang still, pouring its silver light into the town's quiet heart. Somewhere, far out at the edge of the fields, a coyote sings a single note, low, mournful, but not frightening. It echoes off the hills and fades before it can stir anything from sleep. A few leaves stir in response, brushed by a breeze so light it carries no chill. Only the gentle reminder that the world is alive, even in its stillness. The town now seems suspended, like a lantern floating on calm water. No one moves. No lights change. It is as though time itself has decided to rest, letting every heartbeat, every breath, every quiet sigh stretch out just a little longer. The houses hold their sleepers like treasures. The fields cradle their grasses. The sky holds its stars like secrets kept for centuries. Inside, beds breathe with the people lying upon them. Dreams bloom quietly, with no rush. No urgency, just shapes and colors and warmth, drifting through the mind like smoke through sunlight. Some dreams carry stories, some carry only the comfort of weightlessness, a kind of falling without fear, a kind of flying without need. A lamp glows faintly in one window still, a late reader perhaps, or someone keeping company with their own thoughts. The light is not bright enough to cut the night. It merely adds a single warm note to the cool song of moonlight and stars. The figure within does not move much. They sit, they breathe, they maybe turn a page, or maybe simply stare at the quiet town they love, taking in its peace as though storing it for later. The roads look polished now, empty and silvered by the moon. The sidewalks are lined with still shadows, long and straight like the spines of resting animals. Mailboxes, fences, lampposts, all seem to stand a little softer, as if aware that to be rigid now would be rude, that even inanimate things should lean into the night's softness. The church stands tall, but it does not dominate. It shares the night with every other building, every other quiet breath. Its steeple points like a finger toward the endless sky, but not in warning, in wonder. Even the bells rest, heavy and content, waiting for morning not with impatience but with trust. The crickets sing on, the frogs murmur, the creek's quiet trickle threads its way through the silence like silver through cloth. Everything keeps moving, but at a pace so slow, so careful. It feels like nothing moves at all, only that life continues gently, without hurry, without harm. You could walk these streets now and not meet another soul, and yet, you would not feel alone. The town itself feels alive in its rest, as though it keeps watch while its people sleep. It breathes for them, hums for them, whispers for them. It holds the night like a guardian, but not a fierce one, a quiet one, a gentle one, a presence that asks for nothing except that you let yourself drift wherever rest may take you. Your eyes may close here, even if you try to keep them open. The weight of the night is not heavy. It is soft, coaxing, like the slow descent of snow. The rhythm of the crickets, the frogs, the creek, the distant coyote's single call, the endless, patient ticking of time, all of it folds together into a sound that is less like sound and more like safety. You begin to forget that this is a town at all. It becomes a heartbeat, a breath, a single slow sway, like a cradle rocked by invisible hands. The stars blur, the moonlight softens. The night lays its cool palm gently over your forehead, smoothing away thought, smoothing away tension, smoothing away even the memory of waking. And then, there is only quiet. The kind of quiet that lives not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of peace. The kind of quiet that lets the world feel whole, if only for a few hours. The kind of quiet that carries you from this gentle little town into sleep, into dreams, into a night that belongs entirely to rest.